Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for listening to the Admit One podcast, where we're going to talk to students who have successfully navigated the college admission process and earned their ticket to college. We will be reflecting on the student's profile, which will include a discussion around their academic record, extracurricular activities, and application strategy. Today's guest is Jessie, who's a math major at Harvard University and has recently completed her sophomore year. Jessie, super excited to have you on board and looking forward to learning a little bit more about your application and what you've done since.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get talking about the whole process and how it's been so far.
Awesome. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit today about, kind of what brought you to Harvard and what that journey looked like. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your background, some of the things that you were involved with in high school, and some of the extracurricular activities and things that you had. But let's start a little bit about your high school and learning about that.
Yeah, great. So I was raised in the UK from a Greek family. So I went to a British school. So for those of you that are aware of the British education system, that meant doing GCSEs at age 16, which are these big like public exams. And then when I got to, I guess, the latter years of high school or secondary school, I had a choice between A levels and the International Baccalaureate. So I did the IB. I've always been a math nerd, but also always loved languages. So the IB was kind of an excuse to get to do as much, maths, languages, writing, reading, all of the between. And, of course, my school, they didn't have, too much emphasis on the US application process. But for me, I just knew that I had too many broad interests and the UK uni system was a little bit too narrow. And even now that I'm at college and studying maths, like I still take classes in the most random departments. So that keeps me sane. And I'm really glad that I chose to go with the US system rather than UK.
Yeah, one of the things that's most interesting to me when looking at your application is really thinking about you take a lot of different courses, and we'll talk a little bit about your courses and bring them up in a moment. But most of the time for UK students, or oftentimes students are really focused on a particular area of expertise or area of interest. And so if you're a math student, you're kind of focused on that. If you're an English student, you're kind of focused in that area. For you take kind of a wide range of courses. And I'm just curious, is that something that you are cognizant of? Is that something that you sort of planned out and thinking about? You wanted to absolutely go to the U.S. because you do have to figure that out from an IB standpoint early on in high school. So I'm wondering about if that was something that you were thinking of as you went through high school, or was that something that really just kind of happened and it kind of fell into your lap and worked out pretty well for you that you'd taken holistic courses across the board?
Yeah, I think, with hindsight, I wish I kind of, been slightly more purposeful with it, but I genuinely just chose subjects that I loved and it made it easy to do well in them because I found them really cool. And um, I took 4 higher levels at the IB because I just was so curious about the higher level material that was in them. And I think that really did gear me up really well for college in the sense that you do take quite tricky classes, if you wish, in very different domains. I major in math, but I've taken classes in many departments from, like the languages to philosophy to economics. And I think, in high school, with college admissions, you do have to be pretty aware of what you want to do. And I always knew that I wanted to study something maths or maths adjacent. So that's why I knew I was taking higher level maths, whether it was for the UK applications or US. And it just really kept all doors open. Having said that, I think if I was to, decide to stay in the UK, I should have been slightly more strategic. But with US, I'm really glad I kept it broad. And going back, I don't think I would have changed my combination.
Cool. So I'm actually I'll bring up your courses just so that people have some context for it. But you also do take the 4 HLs, which some schools have restrictions on that you can only take 3 HLs. So you take a fourth. I'm wondering, for those of our listeners who may not be super familiar with the IB curriculum, if you can kind of walk them through what that looks like, because you really have to make your decision on the courses you're taking the last 2 years. You have to make that decision as a sophomore in high school.
Yeah, so I guess I'm also trying to get to know the kind of American high school system because all of my American friends. But you basically select your courses for the final 2 years of high school in your sophomore year at the end of it, and there is some flexibility. But within the IB, you have 6 subjects, and traditionally you take 3 at a higher level, which means that it's much easier to spring from those into college level classes, and 3 at a standard level, which is slightly less than I guess, an AP version. So it's surface level, but still, in depth enough. And the IB is really great because you grapple with a mix of coursework and final exams. So if you are a sophomore and you do have the choice for the IB, I am a big IB fan because it means that you get to get a lot of the grade in the bag before you approach your final exams, which was something that was very new to me because in the UK it's honestly insane now that I've done a couple of years of college in the US. 100% of your grade are just like these final exams, and I did that for GCSEs, and it felt so normal then. But now I don't know how I managed that. And yeah, I think it really did gear me up well for college because there's no class where the grade is 100% any component. There's participation involved and projects and coursework and just having a good rapport with the professors, and I think that is really evident, well, it's very present at least in the IB, for
Yeah,
me.
and I think that bodes well for a lot of the things that you try to do when you are creating your application. And from a U.S. standpoint, you're going to have to take your math, science, English, history, foreign language types of things. And so for your application, it's pretty broad. And I wonder if that's been helpful for you since you've actually even gone to college, because you're taking so many different types of courses once you're enrolled there. I mean,
Yeah, no, it is quite funny because I do catch some of my friends that have come from doing completely like humanities classes, going into math, and my god, like I love math, so like I'm happy to do their like homework with them, but like it's a shock to the system coming in and suddenly having like calculus requirement for random majors, and like also I think maths is everywhere. So even the econ concentrators have to, take quite high level like multivariable calculus, and it's always a little bit of a shock to the system to those. And also similarly, I'm a math major, but I love to write, and everyone has a writing requirement. So I was totally happy to do it. But there were quite a few people that were again shocked to the system because they were just used to the computer science, physics, math, holy trinity from college. So I think keeping up all of those skills is quite important because the requirements are there. At least at Harvard. I don't know. I know there are some schools that don't have those general requirements, but yeah.
So, when you're thinking about your, remembering back to your academic record, were there courses that you struggled with? Are there things that maybe wasn't your area of expertise, or are you pretty consistently feeling confident and comfortable with pretty much every class? Because I think that's oftentimes the perception that people have when students go to a Harvard or a similar type of place, that they just are able to do all of these courses. But are there courses that maybe you struggled with a little bit throughout high school? Yeah.
Oh gosh, yes, 100%. I struggled quite a bit with chemistry. I remember I just found it so it wasn't my forte, but I put in a lot of work and I really made an effort to bag as many of the points as I could with the internal assessment. I got very close with my teachers and we did a lot of work, and I managed to get the grade that I wanted at the end. But it was not easy. Even with math, like I love math, but it was very challenging. I put in a lot of hours for that. Um, and I think that's often the case, and something really lovely about college, that you can love a subject that you're not necessarily the best at, but because you love it, it becomes easier. And I think the great thing is, there are kids in the math department that are like I could never be on their level, but I'm doing a curriculum that suits me. So even in school, really do what you love, because I think that's what you should be doing at college.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about testing. You're taking tests during COVID. So what is that like? What were your test scores like? Do you remember what that process?
Yeah, so I did the SAT. I think my thought process was because you have slightly less time pressured, and it takes me a little bit to read. So I took the SAT two times. The first time it was March 14th, 2020, so right when COVID hit. It was the last in-person testing option. Um, Actually, I lied to you. That was the second time that I took it, and thankfully I got my score that time because everything suddenly went test optional afterwards. And for me, with the SAT, it was honestly just like you have to become a robot by the end of it. I genuinely believe that like anyone, even if you don't fully understand it, you can still sweep a great score just by the amount of preparation and repetition and the types of questions. I ended up with, I think God, I remember I got an 800 on the math section. I was really happy about that. And I think a 720 on the English, so altogether 1520. Um, which was okay. I think I would have probably taken it one more time for the reading and writing part, but I don't know. I had other English metrics on my transcript to prove that, I love the subject and I was, had some like, I was okay with it. But the math part was mainly what I focused on. And I also did a math subject test, just because I had the time and I wanted everything to support the fact that I love math and like I could do it well. But I did have a lot of friends that kind of, didn't get what they wanted like prior to COVID, and everything went test optional, and they felt like the SAT didn't necessarily support what they were good at because it's so hit or miss sometimes because it's just the nature of multiple choice. And I think I don't know how test optional things are like moving into the future, but for me at least, I was glad that I got to submit it because I think the more evidence, the better in general.
Yeah, we get a lot of questions about test optional policies and should I submit my test score? Should I not submit my test score? And I think that the reality is, it's not a trick, right? So the schools aren't trying to trick you into sending the scores or not. But the reality is there's added context that you can provide when you submit your test scores. And so if you don't submit your test scores, you're going to need to do other things to really, enhance what that context is and kind of get you up to the level of some of the other students that have submitted them. It's also really based off of the high school, right? So if everybody from your high school is submitting test scores, then generally speaking, you're going to want to regularly submit them as well. But I don't think it's a trick. But I think you certainly want to be able to submit test scores when it's it's going to add to value to your application. And let me start this by saying like a 1520 is a very, very good score. It's a fantastic score. But I get a lot of students who will say, okay, I have a 1520. What am I supposed to do now? I have other people that are in my class that have a 1540 or a 1560. And really, I mean, it's a sliding scale. If you have a 1520, a 1540, like you've done great with testing. I'm not feeling too nervous about what your testing looks like. And I feel confident that you can complete the test and be successful with it. We have a lot of students who will say, okay, I have 1520. I want to take it one more time. Do you think there's value in that? And for me, I talk a lot about, well, maybe, I mean, can you roll out of bed and increase your score by 30, 40 points? If that's the case, then like, yeah, sure. Take the test again. If you can't, and you're going to have to spend a lot of time and energy and effort into that, then the juice probably isn't worth the squeeze, and it's just probably not something that you need to invest your time in. And I'd rather see you investing your time in more extracurricular programming and things of that nature. And so, it ends up being how are you going to most effectively utilize your time, and how's that going to enhance what your application looks like and what your overall profile looks like. So I think for me, that's really what you want to end up doing. Is test optional policies aren't going away; they're actually going to increase, and I think there's a lot of value for a lot of those students who are submitting or not submitting test scores. I think those students certainly can be successful 100%. But I also think you need to understand what your context looks like, and is it going to add value to your overall application. So that actually kind of leads into, you spend a lot of time on Mentor Junior, and so maybe you could talk a little bit about that from an extracurricular standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll start by just explaining what the platform is. So it's an online tutoring platform. It's now a 501c3, so a charity registered in the US, that offers free tutoring and mentoring to kids all around the world that wouldn't otherwise have access to one-on-one academic or extracurricular support. And all of our volunteers are between the ages of 15 and 20, so kind of that, high school and early college ages. And it grew really rapidly during COVID. So I'll start to talk a little bit about how it came to be. So as I've said, I've always been a bit of a math nerd, and part of that was just I'd always like volunteer as a tutor at local primary schools. I'd have multiple tutees. I just really enjoyed teaching maths. So a couple of my friends decided, hey, we'd love to start like volunteering as well. Can we come along? So naturally, I was like, of course. I spoke to teachers at the school, and the need was there. There is such a disparity in the educational playing field in the UK, as there is all around the world. But I was particularly attuned to the issue in London. So the group of girls that, because I went to an all girls school, so the group of girls that I was organizing to come to these schools every single week was growing quite quickly because we'd all come back buzzing. It's just so much fun hanging out with kids and helping them. And I eventually had signed on a couple new schools, and then COVID hit, which meant that we could not conduct school visits any longer. And it was
And can
that,
you actually go back to, because I'd be
yeah.
curious about what was the original structure of Mentor Junior? What are the types of things that that people are doing within that context, and then it'll grow, obviously, right?
Yeah, so the program is just in person mentoring and tutoring. So I tutored a little boy. He was called Lucas, and he had come from quite a disadvantaged background. And as a result, learning in the classroom was really not tailored to his specific needs. And he really benefited from having one on one support. So the majority of the times that I'd spend with Lucas were honestly just, getting close to him, getting him to kind of open up a little bit and be able to trust me as a sort of that, because I think when you're younger, that friend educator barrier is so much more intertwined, which is really lovely. And that, of course, doesn't mean that you're crossing any lines, but it means that there's more similarity in age and understanding. And eventually, I really got to help Lucas, and his math grades significantly improved. And other kids, they kind of needed slightly better socialization skills, so we would do kind of group work with them. It was very tailored because it was small. There were only about by the end of it around like 20 girls and around like 40 kids, so we were able to do small groups. And those sessions were again a mixture of this like mentoring, kind of older sibling advice, and talking about the schools and pressures of friendship groups and where do you sit at lunch and sports. And then the other half would of course be, this is how you spell, or this is how you do addition and multiplication. So that's what it would look like, and we'd go in once or twice a week, and I just helped arrange it from some contacts that I'd been able to make with the primary schools.
So then COVID comes, and obviously you can't be in person anymore, so things shift pretty dramatically.
Mhm.
So how do you kind of take that as like, okay, this is maybe an opportunity to move forward, and I'm going to do something different than what I was doing? Like, what's that thought process like?
Yeah, so basically it was just I initially just wanted to put it online so that we could continue the flow of what we'd been doing. So I only really intended for it to be for those 20 girls and those students. And I just had, used the babysitting money that I'd saved up to buy a domain, called it Mentor Junior, and just sent it to the teachers, and say, hey, like we have this platform. I know the kids will all be on different schedules, so they can, go find their tutors' names and they can book whenever they want. I've just made this for us if you want. Um, and of course, because it's online, I then realized, like, wait, hang on, I no longer have transportation costs. I no longer have the same kind of safeguarding procedures that schools need. They're very different in the online world and a lot more, conducive to scalability. Um, and so I said, hang on, I'm just gonna send this around. So I sent around my school saying, anyone that wants to volunteer, please DM me on Instagram. I think it was the most like active or popular I've been on like social media ever. Like,
Nobody had anything to do.
yeah,
I mean, they're all just they're looking for things.
exactly. Because I mean, not, like everyone had all their like activities just stifled. No one had anything to do. School and then be stuck at home, or I mean, they let like the UK let us out for like one walk a day. It was ridiculous. But everyone had so much time. So it was kind of a perfect storm, but it was really upsetting because COVID had just highlighted those disparities in such an awful way. In the sense that in private schools we were able to have teacher contact every day, whereas in state schools, or some primary schools that were underfunded, which continue to be underfunded, did simply had worksheets sent to them by the schools and then no teacher contact. And a lot of these kids had parents that, they were their parents. They weren't their math teachers. They weren't their English teachers. They had English as a second language, and the need for help was really, increased. So um I was able to match tutors and tutees. I reached out to mommy bloggers, old hockey coaches, old like gymnastics, like every kind of center where I could, find supply and demand of tutors and tutees. I reached out to. I was, tip tapping away, and as the online world does, it really brought together so many, and I was able to. To date, since that inception, we've been able to offer over 50,000 hours of free tutoring to kids all around the world, and I'm still doing it, and I love it, and I think that's one
Crazy.
of the best about.
Crazy. Unbelievable, really.
No, the best thing about it is I think it was intended to be small, but some advice is the online world is wonderful, and it really brings together people that you could never imagine. And I ended up having tutees from, and I didn't even know how to imagine, from like Nigeria and like Bulgaria, like these little hubs of communities would pop up, and it was the most rewarding thing that I think I've ever done, and it was and continue to do. I'm now slightly less involved. I'm still like managing it, but I have people helping me now. Um, but yeah, so that took up most of my junior year of high school, as it would. And I've loved it. I love it. It's yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I oftentimes run into with students that I work with is they have these kind of grandiose ideas, and they want to kind of snap their fingers and it just happens. And what's hard, I think, for sometimes for students to understand is that ideas take different shapes and they go in different directions, and the way that that you envision something may not necessarily be the way that it turns out, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. That actually could be more productive in a lot of ways. And so it's really more thinking a little bit about how do I take things to the next level. So I've got this idea of tutoring. Okay, that's taken away. COVID happens. What's another hole or a gap within society or the world, my world, that I know and that I can fill? And you do a great job of identifying a system that's not properly operating, and students that are not being supported, and then switching that to another step. And so I think that for you to see that kind of growth, that's a really significant component to what your profile is. And as you go into navigating this kind of new role, like how did you, what was that role like for you to take on? Of, okay, now I'm sort of overseeing all of these things, this thing is growing pretty rapidly, I'm managing people. Like, what is that process like for you? Because that's way different than really what you had initially signed up for. I mean, you thought you were basically being a tutor, and now you're managing people and creating a structure, and there's a program in place, and you got this curriculum, and so it's going in between very different countries and all of that type of stuff. So I'm just curious for you, what is that process like as far as navigating what that change looks like?
Yeah, it was crazy. I will never forget, when it took off, because I managed to get some money saving expert to tweet about us, which was really exciting. But it was just one evening of immense chaos, and it was that moment that I realized, as much as I adore the tutoring, I kind of needed all my time to go into just figuring out the structure of this nonprofit. So I really had to break it down. I looked at how kind of other nonprofits were structured in terms of just like what are the safeguarding policies, privacy policies. I just wanted to make sure that all of that was up there and it was all safe and kosher, which of course it was, but you never know sometimes. And I kind of made it like very operationally sound. I'm quite, I love structure, so it was quite like nice for me to just put everything into boxes. So in terms of tutor onboarding, that was one process, and then tutor training, that was another process, and then initially I was doing everything myself. So I would interview every single incoming tutor. And then when I realized that my diary was back to back to back to back, I had to bring on help. So I started delegating, and I'd have a tutor selection team, and then I'd have an outreach team. And um, I had to learn a lot as I went along. I don't think I could have anticipated having to learn about, writing up, safeguarding procedures, and balancing supply and demand of tutors and tutees, and maintaining contacts and doing due diligence. I never thought that I'd have to do that at, 16, 17, but I am so glad that I did. And now that I've kind of I now oversee those smaller kind of operational groups, I am able to tutor sometimes, which is really nice. I mean, that's what I loved, and that's where I started off, so I'm glad that I'm able to continue doing that now. Um and yeah, I learned a lot. It was very, very steep curve.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned is the idea of delegating, and I feel like that's sometimes a challenge for high school students and for anybody, right? Because like this is your baby, right? You've kind of built this enterprise and this operation, and it's hard to let that go. So I'm curious for you about what is that like to say, okay, I've got to allow other people to take on different roles and take on leadership within this, because I would imagine for a lot of 16, 17-year-olds, that kind of creates a little bit of madness, and it becomes more of a frenzy than anything.
It was that. I thought it was a frenzy for a while. It was tough to let it go, in the sense that I think I was what also, because I like had no blueprint. I was just kind of going off what made sense to me, and I'd have all these little weird ways of doing things that just made sense to my brain. And it's obviously all simple. And I think, eventually I was like, explaining things. They're like, yeah, this makes sense. Of course it makes sense. And I was like, hey, thank God I put it in, good hands. But having said that, it's been a few years since I've started doing these allegations, and it's quite fun. Like every year, every school year, I'll roll out applications for the new outreach director and all the different board positions. And I've chosen incorrectly quite a few, not incorrectly, but I think I could have chosen slightly more um, effectively as to what characteristics are needed in the roles. And I'm still learning. I'm still realizing, actually maybe someone that has had certain experiences would be better geared to deal with these roles. And I'm still kind of, learning as to what sorts of backgrounds are most, conducive to productivity in these roles. But it was tough to let go. But it honestly gets selfish at a point, especially because I set up Mentor Junior because I want to help as many people as possible and give as many people opportunities. And because I was doing it as a one-man show for so long, it had plateaued. And inputs, the factors of production that's important to consider. And since I did let it go slightly, it was able to grow as it should have been. So it was a thing I wish I'd considered slightly early on.
And is it at this point still managed by high school students, or are there college students who are now taking over, or do you feel like it's in good hands with the high school students, since that's kind of where it started? And yeah.
Yeah, so it's mainly high school students. I think there's real value in keeping it young, because it really, it also gives back to the tutors, to the volunteers, because I learned so much from working on that at a younger age. I'm still very young, but like when at 16, 17, I think it was one of the most rewarding things that I could have done, and I want to share that gift with people who are willing to put in the work. But having said that, I do think that I should be kind of using the college resources slightly more, maybe slightly higher up. And again, this is all stuff that I am learning how to manage. But all of our tutors are primarily in high school, and we're growing it in the U.S. now a lot more. We're going to start splitting it up. So if anyone's listening to this and needs some volunteering, we'd love to have you.
I actually think it's pretty phenomenal that it's still within the high school realm, and that it's run by high school students. I mean, that's what you created, and I think you're creating more opportunities for high school students to do things and take on different leadership roles and grow within an organization that wasn't there previously. So obviously, the original part and point of your program is to help students, and you're just helping a different arena of students to think critically and be innovative and take on leadership roles. And I think, to me, that's just a great testament to what the organization is, and what the direction is, and how it's grown over time. So I mean, that, to me, I think it's I think it's pretty cool to keep it as high school students running it, because that allows students to have these opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't, and it's something that you're creating or have created for them, to be able to grow. And it's also fresh ideas, right? It's people who are able to take on new things, and think about the world that they're in, right? The education system continues to evolve, and as you become further removed from that context, I think it's important to have people there.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, I have some of the initial emails that I get from parents thanking me. Um, I really cherish them. Like, I printed them out. I have them all saved, just with their feedback, and nothing really matches that feeling of like, oh my gosh, like I actually made this connection and helped this kid get into this school, and it feels not so real. And I think that at least like in London, I was very lucky in the sense that both my parents, they they're Cypriots, and they grew me in this, they raised me in London, but I was always part of so many different communities within London. So I never really felt like I was in a bubble, but it's very easy to get bubbled in your school context and forget that, and it's funny, there's like a common trope, like when you get to college, you just don't talk about what you did in high school. Like, it's not interesting as soon as you go to, if you're still talking about like what you did. It's like, but so do something that you really care about, because that persists. I have college friends that are still helping me with Mentor Junior. I'll be stressed, and one of my math buddies will take over for a little while, answer a couple of emails on my laptop, and that's something that just do something. I think, like, my biggest advice, and I say this to my friends that are kind of going through the process, just do something that'll stick with you, and not for the sake of college, but for the sake of just wanting to do it because that's what will last. And this is the same with math for me. Like I just genuinely just loved it, and I'm still doing it, even though, oh my gosh, like I question it every day because it took a college. But it's yeah, um, it becomes easy when you do something that makes you feel great.
Yeah, so obviously, Mentor Junior is a big part of your puzzle, and a big part of your college application process. But talk to me maybe a little bit about some of those other pieces of your puzzle, because you're involved in a lot of different things, and from an application standpoint, we're always looking at all of these different pieces. So, talk to me a little bit about what some of those other roles are, and how they played within the application process for you.
Yeah, so Mentor Junior was really big. But I played field hockey for years. That was huge for me. I loved it. Most of my friends came from it. So many of my social skills and I don't know, just personality and character I think came from the sport. So that was really big. I was head girl at my school. It sounds funny to Americans every time I say it. It's just like, but, yeah, whatever the equivalent is, like student body president. And I was very involved in the math community at school, so president of math society, um, and just did various other things within the school context, kind of like the classics, the debating and Spanish debating, and I don't know, various just other kind of little intellectual escapades, online courses, and readings and lectures, etc. But the main things I think were the sport, so hockey, mentor junior, head girl, and president of math society. And I think when tying it in, it was actually really hard. We worked like for a long time on trying to figure out how best to put it all forward. And I think because mentor junior for me it was such a big thing, it became very easy to kind of like intellectualize it and be like, this is my philosophy on the educational equality in the UK, and this is how I addressed it. I also think, I'm a Brit, so I kind of came from like, the essays that I'd written were all very academic and very like, I knew how to structure it, make an argument. None of the fluffy kind of, not fluffy, but genuinely like lovely voice that comes through in the kind of more like American writing style. So I had to adapt because the essay that I ended up writing, I don't think I've written anything like that since. But it was so much nicer, and I think you really heard my voice coming out of it. And I think that if any of my friends or even kind of more like peripheral acquaintances had read that essay, they would know that they could tell that it was something that I had written if my name wasn't even on it. Whereas the initial kind of drafts of the essay, my Common App essay, which were about kind of, this is what's happening in the UK, this is how many kids are, under, school, like it's like the the more statistical academic piece. I think that could have really be written by anyone. They just had to know that I had done Mentor Junior. But there are lots of creative ways, I think, of weaving in little things that you're proud of, and by yeah, I don't know. I'm sure we'll dive into that stuff more, but
Yeah, we definitely will. So, I think that the other thing that's important for students sometimes that they struggle with is understanding that these essays are not just individual entities within the application. You're generally going to have your main college essay, and then you have several supplemental essays that you'll also be utilizing. And within those supplemental essays, you're really trying to tell the whole story. So you're trying to put all of those pieces together to give a clear indication or clear representation of who you are. And too often, I think students will look at things and look at one particular part of their story, or they're just answering the prompt, which obviously you want to answer the prompt, but you also want to think about what are the elite components to my profile. And I think you do a great job. We'll take a look at one of your essays in just a minute here, but I think you do a great job of representing different components to your profile, and thinking a lot about what that looks like.
I remember I loved writing this essay.
Cool. So yeah, so we'll take a look here at the essay, and maybe you could just give a little bit of an overview about what that is.
Yeah, no, that sounds brilliant. So, I guess so. Throughout, this was kind of the final puzzle piece for the application, and I was, looking through all the other essays, and it was very much, yes, I accomplished this, this, and this. These were my resources. This is what I did with them. But one of the biggest parts of my identity is that, all my family is from Cyprus, and every summer I go to Cyprus, and I stay with my grandparents, and I work at my grandfather's little car rental store, just helping him, wash cars, speak to customers, change tires, all the above. And I thought that this could be an opportunity to kind of share that side of that part of me and my upbringing. And my granddad, bless him, he always gives me advice and kind of these like cheesy, corny, automotive inspired, like just wisdom in the context of cars. So the one that I think Jamie's paused on now is like, don't just follow the traffic, always check directions for yourself. And I kind of translated that to like what that means to me and how that applies in the context of my life. So, um, I do think that, in the context of this piece of advice, I can't quite remember what I wrote. Oh yeah, I am quite, interested in, social theory and, news and politics and, being really aware of groupthink. And a lot of my work as head girl was to kind of undo a lot of the, I don't know, social media generation, group thinking, not, I care a lot about that stuff. So that was kind of an excuse for me to talk about how much I cared about that and how it was inspired by my grandfather's wisdom. Or another piece of advice that he would always give me is, take care of your car in the garage and they'll take care of you on the road. And I guess you can translate that to, be kind to your future self. And that's, advice that I take with me everywhere. So here I was able to talk about, I just work really, I'm like one of the things that I love most. I work really hard. And I wanted to tell them that. And I think I said, through whether it's hockey, just like me, like, working out so I'm able to, be stronger on the pitch, or whether it's just studying, like, yeah, I will put in the extra couple hours in today so that I know I can be, extra on form tomorrow in my exam. Like, just various philosophies that I had that were inspired by my granddad, and the life that he had. And my granddad, he left school at 11 and he never had access to formal education. And so for me, education has just been such a prize to be cherished and spread in the family. And I think that that just is such a big part of my life and my family. Education is so big because it wasn't always available to us. And I just, this essay was a lot more me than any other essay I think I was able to write about, because I was able to just share the various philosophies that inspire who I want to be and who I've been trying to become, and who I am at the moment. So yeah, and I structured it in 3 little pieces of advice, um, and with explanations underneath each of them.
Yeah, I think there's two key components to this essay that I really really love. The first, and I think part of what students need to understand when they're writing these essays is they need to have an understanding of putting yourself in the shoes of the admission officer, the person who's reviewing your essay and your application, because that person is going to spend somewhere between 8 to maybe 15 minutes at a maximum, right? Reviewing all of your application materials. And so when you're writing these essays, I think it's really critical to think about, how am I presenting this in a way that's going to grab their attention and something that they haven't seen before. And the other thing is, like, they're not reading your application only, right? They might have been sitting there and reading 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 applications in the day. And if your number's 65 or 72 or whatever, they've seen the same structures over and over and over and over. I think that even sometimes when you structure things differently, that can really grab the attention. I think that you do a great job with this in this essay. Is okay, here we have bold, we have quotes, things are blocked off a little bit differently. So presenting it in a little bit of a different way, to me, grabs their attention. And as a reader, I see the same thing over and over and over. And then I get to your application and I haven't even read a word yet. And it's like, oh, this is something different. I haven't seen this before. And to me, I think that's something that I talk to students about a lot. I don't want it on every essay, obviously. You don't want to go crazy with it. But when the format looks really similar over and over, readers, I think, have a tendency to be feeling like they're looking at the same thing. So I think that you do a great job in being creative and presenting things a little bit differently than how most students would think about this. The other thing that I think is really important about this essay from your context is you've got to remember when you're looking at this essay, that you're applying as a math major, right? And so as a math major, I think stereotypically, you're going to see students who are focused on their area of study. Things are going to be pretty academic. they're going to be focused on what they're looking at from a programmatic standpoint, those types of things. In this essay for you, you come across as very authentic, very sincere. You're presenting all of this information very clearly. You're articulate with it. And it's demonstrating another side to you that most admission officers don't generally see from a standard math applicant. And so, not only do you have some of the math competitions that you've won, and obviously Mentor Junior you've created, which is a tutoring program, so still pretty academic, but you also have this side of you where you're demonstrating an ability to be thoughtful and an ability to be to look at the world through different lenses and to think critically about the world around you. And I think, to me, that's one of those things that, as a reader, when I'm looking at something like this, that's gonna jump out to me, right? I'm reading 70 applications. Like, this would be one of those things that, oh, this is a math major who's going to be sincere and think philosophically about things, and talk about what they've learned overall, and sort of how they view the world. I think, to me, that shows, especially within the U.S. system, a really interesting aspect of an applicant's profile and overall view on the world. So I think that those are the two things, to me, is from a structural standpoint, but then also it's so important for students to really focus on who is the reader that's going to be reading this, and how are they going to be taking it, because so much of writing is subjective, and we want to be able to present our best self, and sometimes people aren't going to necessarily take it the way that you're intending it. But I think you do a great job here of writing these things and presenting it in a way that is clear, concise, authentic, and really demonstrates who you are as an individual.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, it was funnily enough one of the easier ones to write, I think, because it just felt um it was very personal. And yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we could talk a little bit about your approach to college, philosophically, as you start thinking about applying to schools. Like, what does that look like for you? Are you just looking at a couple of different schools? Is there a multitude? Because I think nowadays you have students who are applying to 10, 12, 15, 20 different schools, those kinds of things. And that's a lot. That would not be something that I would recommend. But I also think, you're coming from the UK. So maybe you're feeling like, hey, I feel pretty comfortable with some of the schools that I have here. I also have a couple of aspirations to look at schools, here in the US. So what's your approach as you start planning to this? Are you thinking like, I want to ED somewhere, I want to EA somewhere? What does that mindset look like? And did you do a lot of research on the front end of things? Did you have an idea of programmatically, like, this math program is different for this reason or that reason? Like, what are some of the things that kind of guide you into this process, and inevitably, obviously, lead you to one of the best schools in the world? But I can't imagine you went into it necessarily anticipating that would be the outcome.
Yeah, so I'll approach this question with the some wisdom from hindsight, because I think that my approach was not the best. I did not do too much research on individual schools. I'd say, I think, applying from the UK, and I had really great offers in the UK. My whole life was here, so if I wanted to go to the US, it was kind of something that was really, quote unquote, like, worth it. Even though it's so silly now that I'm there and, like, I know what the schools actually mean. I was like, I didn't do it in the best way, so I basically just applied to Ivy's, MIT, Duke, BU, UNC, a few schools at Stanford. But I now with hindsight, I really wish that I'd done more research on each individual school, because I think even if I had, been admitted to some of the schools that I had applied to, I genuinely don't think that I would have gone over my UK options, just because they had a shiny name attached to them. And uh, I really wish that I had done that. And I think, with Harvard and Yale. So I applied early to Yale, because, well, for various reasons. I'd done research into the math department and their various philanthropic things, see how I could grow Mentor Junior there. There were a lot of reasons why I loved that school. and Harvard and MIT as well. I did a lot of kind of, looking into some of them, but I wish I'd done a lot more looking into the rest of them because they take a lot of time, these applications. Oh my goodness. Like the especially because like all the obviously have like individual essays, so like you really have to deep dive and picture yourself in the school. And even now that I am at college and I live in Cambridge, Mass, and I love it so much. I love that it's like a little college town, and I'm close to Boston, so I don't feel I'm a London kid, so like I like the city that's close by. But I don't think I could have done Dartmouth, if I'm being entirely honest. Like it's a brilliant school, but I think that it's because of just the geography, and that's reason enough. So I think really just getting to know the school as much as you can, and even just using platforms like, I hate to say it, like LinkedIn, like try and speak to a current student. I didn't do this, but I've had a few kids reach out to me, kids, I mean like applicants, like reach out to me, and I gladly, of course, I'll speak to them. It's so nice. Like I love to speak to someone about my experience at college and just give them an unfiltered view. And a lot of my friends have had that, and they're more than happy to. So that's something to keep in mind as well, to get the unfiltered opinion, because of course college websites are shiny and not all. But yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I find I talked about this a minute ago is the number of schools that people apply to. You know, I, I a couple of years ago, people were applying to like 5 or 6 schools, and then it crept up to like 8 to 10. Now we see like 12, 15, 18, 25. I mean, there's some absurd numbers out there. I would never recommend that, as I mentioned. And really one of the main reasons is just because of the logistics behind submitting your application to all of these types of places is really intense. You have schools that have 4 or 5 different supplementals, 6, 7 supplementals. And so, the workload that goes into them is really pretty significant. And I think that to me is one of the things that I always struggle with is, the the logistics of applying to these highly selective schools is really important. Like Stanford, if you're going to apply to Stanford, and I hear this sometimes, like I'm just going to throw an application out to Stanford, right? And I'll be like, well, what do you think is going to happen? Like, do you think Stanford is somehow going to make a mistake? Like they're not gonna make a mistake on their application and admit you. If you're gonna be admitted to Stanford, you're gonna do stuff that's really significant, and you're gonna put a lot of time and effort into these essays and these supplementals, and that's not easy. So I think that prioritizing a couple of schools certainly makes sense. But to your point, there's a lot that goes on with this, and there's a lot of effort that you need to put into it. And so having a couple of schools that you're most focused on, that certainly makes a lot of sense, and you want to reach, but I don't think it needs to be necessarily, the end goal is it has to be this school or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also the case that when you actually start looking at the essay prompts, there's no copy pasting available. There's like it's all like one college wants to know about what course you teach if you were a professor, and another one wants to know about what kind of roommate you're going to be. And it was honestly a really fun exercise, but it was only fun because I genuinely think that for the schools that were asking that of me, I'd be like, yeah, you know what, it's worth it. Like it'd be so cool if I got to study here. And the schools that I honestly wasn't as crazy about, it felt like a bit of a burden. So if it is feeling like a burden to write for this place, maybe it's not even right for you, because you should be wanting to put all that work in, and that possibility of being in whichever school you're into. So
Yeah. So, now here you are. You're a couple years into college. Things have been going really well, or I imagine they have. That's what I want to hear. Is like, what's it been like for you as you look back? Are there pieces of advice that you can give? Are there things that you feel like maybe you missed? But yeah.
yeah, I mean, I've loved it. It's honestly been, I think, some of the 2 best years that I've had. I just love college. I think there's a perfect mixture of fun and working hard. It's funny when you when you get there, they kind of give you this triangle, and you can only have 2 corners at once. So it's either academics, social life, and sleep, and you pick two. You can't have all three. It's exhausting, but the most rewarding kind of academic, social, fun experience that I've ever had. And it's funny because I think Cambridge is like this little village, not village, it's like a town where you are maximum 10 minutes away from any of your friends, and it feels super safe. And you're walking around and you have these like incredible professors. I was taught intro to econ by Jason Furman, and just various other incredible professors. And I'm like, I feel like this is like an insult to them to be teaching me intro classes. And um, like Noam Alki is teaching me linear algebra. It's like, I don't know, like Picasso teaching someone how to hold a pencil, and it just feels so inspiring. And I think it's college wherever you end up going. And I genuinely believe this. Like, these years are just so transformative. And it's the first time that for so many people, they're away from home. Even my friends that were kind of disappointed in the college process have had the best time, because I think you just assign those years of your life to you attribute them to the environment that you're in and the people that you're meeting. And it's quite hard to not like it if you do put in the effort. That's not to say there aren't challenges, of course. Like, it's very my first few all nighters, and stresses about who you're gonna live with, and like all of that still exists. But on the whole, it's just magical. And I think that you know I this summer I'm going to be in the States again, and part of me is just so excited because I get to be with my college friends again. And suddenly it's a very filtered group of, not filtered, it's super diverse, but there's just this underlying sense that everyone there just makes the most of every opportunity that they're given. And it makes it so much fun because they're just real doers. And things that are mentioned always end up getting done, like whether it's like a trip with friends or like study sessions. It's just a very reliable type of person. And I love it. So
Well, that's awesome, Jessie. I feel like that's a great way to end it too. I want to definitely thank you for taking the time, and it's super interesting to kind of look back at what you had completed in high school, how it got you here, and then how it leads you into the future. And I'm sure that you will be successful in anything that you do moving forward. And so we very much appreciate you taking the time and sharing your story with us. Please do keep an eye out for future episodes. We'll have students who have gone through the process and are at places like Vanderbilt, Brown, Cornell, Scripps College, lots of different places on the radar. We'll be putting new episodes up each week. Please make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to everything on social media. And we look forward to learning more from other students. And thanks again, Jessie, for all of your time. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
thank you so much. I appreciate it.